Part 47. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 461. Chapter 461 The Birth of a Child. Xiaoling, I allowed you to keep it, but I didn't allow you to carry it with you all the time. Pei Xian's tone was cold. It took Xiaoling a few seconds to hear what he said. She was so frightened that she wanted to hide the amulet, but he snatched it away. You can't hold this kind of thing in your hands. He looked down at her coldly. Don't use excuses like protecting your safety to prevaricate me. Your safety will be protected by me. Give me. She said hoarsely. Her whole heart was balled up, and the pain in her lower body was tight. She felt like she had been torn into pieces, roasted on the fire, and then cooked in a pan. Give me the amulet, back to me. Pei Xian looked at her coldly. I'm here to accompany you, but the amulet won't work. He threw the amulet to the nurse and said, take it back. The nanny felt sorry for the lady in the hospital bed. She had already suffered a lot from giving birth, and she still had to quarrel with her husband at this juncture. However, this was not something that a servant like her could take care of. She responded cautiously, took the amulet and walked out of the ward. Give it back to me, Xiaoling cried. The labor pains of giving birth were so strong that she had no time to endure them. She was afraid of losing strength and was afraid that she would not be able to deliver the baby smoothly. She has always had a belief in her heart that as long as the amulet is there and Lilei is by her side, she will have nothing to fear. But now, the amulet has been taken away. The faith in her heart collapsed. She suddenly felt unsure whether she could really give birth to the child successfully. Still, her cry was stuck in her throat, and another wave of pain hit her, leaving her speechless. Pei Xian felt distressed when he saw that she was almost cramping in pain, but he hardened his heart and did not relent and returned the amulet to her. As long as I'm here, you'll be fine, he said gently and calmly. I will always be with you. He did not believe that he, a living person, was no better than an amulet. Xiaoling was about to collapse. She cried hoarsely and rolled her body, feeling very unsteady. She had long forgotten what the doctor told her not to cry or yell or exert strength. She was very scared and her mind was filled with thoughts of what to do. What to do? What should you do if something happens to your child? Oh my God, what's going on? The little nurse pushed the door in and was startled by Xiaoling's condition. You can't continue like this, Ms. Pei. She leaned over to check Xiaoling's condition and said urgently. The birth canal has not been opened to the appropriate width. If you use up your strength now, you will have no strength when you give birth to the baby. Xiaoling vaguely heard her words, and her sanity, which was on the verge of collapse, returned. She barely controlled herself. However, once the emotional breach was opened, it was like breaking a dike, and it was not easy to take it back. She was so confused that she didn't know how long she had to endure it, until the little nurse came in for the second time and said to her, it's time to enter the delivery room. Ms. Pei, don't be nervous, come on. Where does Xiaoling find the strength to cheer up? She has been in poor physical condition for a while, and she just had a fight with Pei Xian, so she didn't know how much energy was wasted. At this moment, even if she tried her best, the child could not be born smoothly. She had tried hard for a long time, but her energy was getting weaker and weaker. The doctors and nurses were also very anxious. I'm afraid she won't be able to give birth to this child on her own. The doctor went to Pei Xian and explained the current situation to him in a concise manner. There are currently two options, the doctor said. The first is to use forceps to clamp out the child. This method may cause damage to the child, such as disability, cerebral palsy, and other irreversible conditions. Of course, the child may be safe and sound. The other method is to have a cesarean section. This method will cause more damage to the mother and will take a long time to recover. Mr. Pei, Please make your decision. Use the forceps, Pei Ziyan said without thinking. Mr. Pei, the nurse on the side, was a little surprised. Xiaoling had been hospitalized here for several days. She knew very well how much Xiaoling cared about the baby and didn't want it to be harmed in the slightest. If Xiaoling was given the choice, she would definitely choose a cesarean section. Unfortunately, she was already in so much pain that she was a little delirious, so the hospital could only ask her husband. "Aren't you going to think about it again?" said the little nurse. "Nowadays, the technology of cesarean section is very mature, but forceps is more dangerous. It's really strange. According to the news, this child should be Mr. Pei's eldest son. Logically speaking, he should pay more attention to it than Ms. Pei, but why doesn't he seem to care less now? If you have no more children, you can have another one. Xiaoling only has one," Pei Ziyan said in a low voice, as if he could see what the little nurse was thinking. The little nurse was stunned for a moment, and then she realized how infatuated this man was. What a great Chinese husband! How many people today cruelly make their wives suffer for the sake of their children? But Mr. Pei clearly occupies a high position and holds great power. What kind of woman would he want? Yet he is so tender to his wife and cannot bear to let her suffer any harm. The little nurse was very moved. She didn't know that it was precisely because this child was not Pei Ziyan's that Pei Ziyan could not care so much. He wished that this child would die and become crippled, and that everything would be over. The touched nurse went to prepare the forceps. "Ms. Pei, now we will use forceps to help you take out the baby." The medical staff gathered around Xiaoling, who was semi-conscious in pain. "Please be patient. Mother and baby will be safe." "I don't want forceps," she said weakly, but because her voice was too low, no one heard her. This is the best obstetrics and gynecology hospital in the city. Although a group of doctors and nurses stated that the consequences were very serious when they faced Pei Ziyan, when they actually put on the forceps to remove the child, they all used it for 12 seconds. "I try my best to protect my children as much as possible." The child was pinched out. His whole body was purple and bloody, and his eyes were tightly closed. "He didn't cry," a little nurse said softly. Xiaoling also noticed it and was very anxious. "Why isn't he crying?" She looked at the child. His little body was wrinkled, ugly and thin, and she didn't know if he was alive or not. He was lifeless. She was so anxious that tears were about to flow down her face. "What's wrong with him?" The little nurse patted the child twice, but he still didn't cry. "Send for rescue," they made a prompt decision. One of the nurses squatted down to comfort Xiaoling. "Ms. Pei, don't worry too much. Newborns don't cry. Our hospital encounters this many times every year. Many children can be rescued. Don't worry." How could she not be anxious? Holding on to her exhausted postpartum body, she waited for news about her child. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 462. Chapter 462. The bleeding hasn't stopped. Pei Ziyan came in to accompany her, squatted down and held her hand. "Xiaoling, are you okay?" She had neither the strength nor the inclination to speak. At this moment, she hated him extremely. If the man in front of her hadn't taken away the amulet in her hand, she wouldn't have been so confused that she couldn't keep up during the process of giving birth. Need to apply forceps. If forceps is not used, will the baby be safe? Her body was trembling slightly, and she clasped her hands on her chest and prayed. Seeing her like this, Pei Ziyan's expression became more gloomy. He was already thinking about what kind of miserable place he should send that evil to if he could survive safely. Finally, the little nurse rushed over to report the good news. "Congratulations to Mr. Pei and Ms. Pei, the child is safe and sound." "Where is the child? Let me take a look," Xiaoling said weakly. It's in an incubator and it's inconvenient to move. The little nurse was a little embarrassed. Madam, you can wait until you recover before you go see the child. I want to go see him now, Xiaoling insisted. You can't move now, Pei Ziyan said. I don't. Xiaoling was very stubborn. The man in front of her was not the child's biological father. In such a huge hospital, she was the only one connected by blood to the child. How could she feel relieved if she didn't see the child with her own eyes? She struggled to get up. Don't move, the little nurse hurriedly went to help her, but suddenly she was stunned and said, "Oh my God, the blood, you're bleeding, hasn't stopped. This is a sign of postpartum hemorrhage, which can be fatal." The little nurse's face changed with fright, and she hurried to find the attending doctor. Xiaoling also felt dizzy and staggered down. Pei Ziyan held her body that fell to the ground and said to her fiercely, "Just survive and I will let them try their best to save your child. If you dare to die, don't think so. Why don't you save the child? He will be buried with you. No, he will be fed to wild dogs." Xiaoling was frightened by his ferocious expression. Devil, this man is a devil. She was sent to the emergency room for a day and a night. When I opened my eyes, I saw the child for the first time. This is thanks to the doctor. He said to Pei Ziyan, "Madam can't be stimulated anymore. Postpartum bleeding is too dangerous and could lead to death. If she can't see the child, the consequences will be unpredictable if she gets anxious." Pei Ziyan looked cold, but still asked someone to put the child's incubator into her ward. Xiaoling turned her head on the hospital bed and looked at the little guy. He is a very thin baby boy, his body is still a little purple, he seems smaller than other babies, his eyes are closed tightly, his face is wrinkled, he cries occasionally, he is as weak as a kitten. Xiaoling felt very distressed, but she couldn't muster any strength to get out of bed to take care of him. The mother and son looked at each other from a distance for many days, separated by a bed and an incubator. During the period, Pei Ziyan came to see her. Xiaoling originally wanted to ignore him, but then she thought about it. Her child's life was now in his hands, and she couldn't offend him no matter what. Therefore, although he was not warm to Pei Ziyan, he was not indifferent either. There is a superficial peace between the two of them, and the child in the incubator looks like a peaceful family of 3 to outsiders. The young nurses all said privately that Mr. Pei really doted on his wife and cared for her far more than he did for his newly born eldest son. It was rare to see a good man who loved his wife like this. But no one knows, that's just because this child is not Pei Ziyan's biological child at all. The doctor said to Pei Ziyan, "You have to take good care of your wife. Her condition is not very good. Although the postpartum bleeding has been controlled, it is easy to have sequelae. If you are not careful, you will never be able to get pregnant again." Pei Ziyan's face was dark. "No matter what, we must preserve her fertility." The doctor said, "We will try our best." After seeing the doctor off, Pei Ziyan stood at the end of the corridor and lit a cigarette. The situation was so serious. If I had known it was so, I should have aborted the child regardless of her strong objections. Pei Ziyan felt a little regretful and frowned tightly. "Boss," it was Chu Chen's voice. These days, Pei Ziyan has been accompanying Xiaoling, who is pregnant, and Chu Chen has been accompanying him. Chu Chen asked, "What should we do with that child?" Pei Ziyan said, "When her health gets better, we will send the child to an orphanage." Chu Chen said, "The child is too young. I'm afraid it will be difficult for him to survive if he is sent there like this." Pei Ziyan said, "It doesn't matter." Chu Chen shuddered in his heart and understood what he meant. He was afraid that even if the boy would not encounter any accidents in the orphanage, Pei Ziyan would send someone to cause some accidents. That child won't live long. Before Xiaoling is discharged from the hospital, take good care of him. Pei Ziyan's tone was as calm as water. "We will use the best food and clothing. We must take good care of him and make Xiaoling feel at ease. After Xiaoling felt relieved, her body only if he recovers as soon as possible, and if his body recovers as soon as possible, can he give birth to the real flesh and blood of the Pei family as soon as possible. Chu Chen still lowered his head and agreed. Pei Ziyan asked Chu Chen to stay in the hospital and left himself. He did not appear again for more than a month after that. Every day, Chu Chen would report Xiaoling's condition to him. Once, he asked, "Boss, why don't you come and see Madam? She has been in poor health recently and can't eat anything." Pei Ziyan said calmly, "If I go, she can eat more? It's enough for you to take care of her over there. When she can be discharged from the hospital, take her home directly." Chu Chen understood that he didn't plan to come and see it. Thinking about it, I think it is understandable. This child is not the boss's biological child. The boss has already done his best to do this for their mother and son. How could he ask him to come to the hospital to visit their mother and son in person, which would cause trouble for himself? Besides, Pei Ziyan is usually very busy with his business. He has already put down several major projects for the sake of Xiaoling's production. If this continues, it will affect the emperor's business dominance. So Chu Chen continued to take care of Xiaoling on his behalf. Xiaoling doesn't care whether she can see Pei Ziyan or not. If she had to choose, he would rather face Chu Chen every day. At least, the danger and oppression of this running dog were much lower than those of his master. Now, the baby can get out of the incubator, and the unhealthy purple color on his skin has faded. His small hands and feet are soft and white, but he still can't open his eyes very well, and bubbles often come out of his mouth. Xiaoling hugged him and looked around, unable to put it down. She felt that the child's eyebrows seemed like hers, and also seemed a bit like Li Lei's, no matter how beautiful they looked. In fact, newborn babies all look similar. She just loves the house and crow, so she thinks the baby is good looking. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weiniang. Chapter 463. Chapter 463 Confrontation. The nurse came over and introduced the child's condition to her. Mrs. Although the baby was a little thin when he was born, he has been doing well these days and his physical condition is very stable, except for some problems with his blood type. What's the problem? Xiaoling asked. The little nurse said, "Madam, you have blood type A, so Mr. Pei must have a rare blood type. The baby's blood type inherited from his father, which is the very rare Nsu type. You must take extra care at ordinary times. If you are injured or lose too much blood, it is difficult to get timely blood transfusion." Xiaoling's heart skipped a beat. I remembered that I once heard someone say that Li Lei did have a rare blood type. She didn't expect that her child would inherit this. Li Lei had many high-quality genes, but inheriting such a blood type was not considered lucky. This blood type is too dangerous. She just hopes that the baby will be safe. She was holding her child with mixed emotions. The little nurse is still warning, be sure to pay attention to protection. Xiaoling nodded and thanked her for the reminder. Feng Kun learned that she had given birth to a son and came to visit her in the hospital. He brought a lot of old clothes for the baby and said, "These are Beijia clothes worn by other children. They are popular and should be worn by newborns. The newborns will be able to feed them easily. I have disinfected all these clothes for you." There is a folk legend that children wearing Beijia clothes are easy to feed. Originally, Zhou's mother also begged for a lot of Beijia for her. Unfortunately, since the last abortion pill incident, Xiaoling no longer trusts Zhou's mother and refuses to use the things Zhou's mother gave her. Now, after receiving the Beijia that Feng Kun asked for, Xiaoling is very grateful. "Thank you. What are you being polite to me about? Feng Kun smiled, let me see the baby. Xiaoling carefully held the child to him. The little baby in her arms was sleeping peacefully, with the corners of her lips slightly raised, not knowing what she was dreaming about, with a sweet look on her face. Xiaoling smiled, he is quite well behaved. He pretends to be sensible when he knows there are guests coming. You don't know how troublesome he usually is. He cries when he feels slightly uncomfortable. His sleep is light and he has to be coaxed all the time. Feng Kun laughed and praised, little clever guy. Isn't that true? Xiaoling also smiled, I hope he can be like his father in the future. She wanted to say that he was as smart as his father, but she held back in the middle of the sentence. Thinking of the man far away, she felt slightly melancholy. Feng Kun noticed her emotions and changed the topic, this child was born in winter, you have to be careful to keep him warm and raise him carefully. Xiaoling nodded and retracted her thoughts. The doctor said. She hesitated, and she could only say this to Feng Kun, the child has inherited Li Lei's rare blood type, and he cannot suffer from excessive blood loss due to bumps in the future. Feng Kun was a little surprised and pondered, in that case, you should let the child return to Li Lei. Both father and son have rare blood types, so they can take care of each other together. Xiaoling hesitated. What Feng Kun said was true. When father and son are together, each other has an extra layer of insurance, and their lives can be guaranteed. But, what if Li Lei finds out that I gave him a son and comes to me again, asking me to come back to him? Feng Kun thought about it again, then smiled, Xiaoling, this is a good opportunity. What good opportunity? Xiaoling was confused. Feng Kun said, I think Pei Xian may not agree with you sending the child back to Li Lei. Xiaoling didn't understand what Feng Kun meant at first, so Feng Kun explained it to her. Gradually, Xiaoling's eyes lit up. Stayed in the hospital for some time. Xiaoling and the child's health were getting better, so they went through the discharge procedures. The day they were discharged from the hospital was deserted. Apart from Chu Chen, there was only one driver accompanying the mother and son. Even the little nurse couldn't see it and complained, no matter how busy Mr. Pei is, he should come to pick you up. You just gave birth to a son for him, and he treats you like this. How will he live in the future? They originally thought that Pei Xian was very protective of Xiaoling. Later, when Xiaoling was hospitalized for a long time, they felt that it was not the case. How could a husband not show up for more than a month when his wife was in confinement for her first child? No matter how much money you give or how many servants you hire, what's the use? Xiaoling couldn't answer the nurse's words, so she smiled politely and walked forward with the child in her arms. Behind him, the young nurses could be heard talking, do you think Ye Xingling used some conspiracy to marry Pei Xian? Boss Pei was forced to marry his son, so he was so cold to their mother and son? Okay, just stop saying a few words, another little nurse said, both the mother and the child are pitiful enough. These gossips made Xiaoling feel a little desolate. She held the child in her arms tighter, and couldn't help but wonder if this child was born next to her biological father, would he be well taken care of, and the family of 3 would enjoy an enviable family life. Gorgeous. It's a pity that there is no if. She got into the Rolls-Royce sent by Pei Xian and went all the way back home. The red brick walls of the villa are still exquisite, the streamlined black iron front door cast by famous craftsmen, and the large expanses of lush ivy. The driver opened the car door for Xiaoling. She got out with her child in her arms and walked into this familiar yet unfamiliar home. Madam is back, Zhou Ma came out to welcome her, and when she saw her, a warm smile appeared on her face. Madam, you have worked hard these days. Are you tired after coming back from the hospital? Come on, give me the little master, the baby, she originally wanted to say, the young master, but suddenly remembered that the child was not Pei Xian's son, and abruptly changed her words, change hands. Xiaoling glanced at her warily, took a step back, held the child and moved away. Can't blame her, it was actually the incident when she was given the abortion pill during her pregnancy that was so painful that she could no longer trust Zhou's mother. Zhou Ma's outstretched hand froze in mid-air, with a stern look on her face. In the front hall, a tall man walked out and stood on the porch looking at her. It is Pei Ziyan. Today, he was wearing a dark sweater and his expression was colder than usual. He looked at Xiaoling without saying a word. After not seeing her for a month, she had lost weight. Her palm-sized face looked even smaller, and her chin was pointed and without any flesh. She was wearing a light beige long coat, holding her little baby in cotton swaddling clothes, and stood in the courtyard with a vigilant attitude. She looked lonely, as if she would fall over if the wind blew. He felt agitated in his heart. "Give the child to Mother Zhou," he ordered. She was still wary. Zhou's mother said, "Madam, please just leave the baby to me. You're back now, so you can't hold her 24 hours a day. Besides, it's winter, the yard is so cold, what's wrong with the baby being frozen? Manage." End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 464. Chapter 464 Cruelty. Xiaoling still hesitated. Although she knew that now that he had returned home, it would be easy for him to touch her child, but due to psychological factors, she always felt more at ease holding it in her hands. Pei Ziyan said coldly, "Or do you want the child to get hurt?" She looked at him blankly, not knowing what he meant. She was holding the baby well, how could the baby get hurt? However, after a few seconds, he came to his senses. He was saying that if she didn't hand over the child, he would let the child get hurt. She turned pale. Zhou's mother took a few steps forward and said, "Madam, let me come." After saying that, she carefully took the child from her arms. Xiaoling hesitated, half pushed, and half handed the child into Zhou's mother's hands. Zhou's mother held the child in her arms and retreated to a sheltered area on the porch. The child's face, which was originally red from the cold, gradually calmed down. He opened a pair of pure eyes, looked at Zhou's mother, and grinned. Zhou Ma's heart is full of tenderness. After all, she is a woman. She can't help but love and care for a baby when she sees it. Even if the child's biological father is unknown, he is innocent and should not be treated roughly. Mother Zhou, who had given birth to several children, coaxed her children lovingly, skillfully, and kindly. Xiaoling was a little worried at first, but seeing this scene, she was more or less relieved. Pei Ziyan was still standing in the corridor, looking at her. "Come here." His voice was cold, like eternal ice. Xiaoling was scared in her heart, but she knew in her heart that it was a blessing, not a curse, and that she could not avoid it. She couldn't resist the huge coercion emanating from him, so she bit the bullet and took a few steps towards him. Pei Ziyan slapped her without any warning. The crisp sound sounded startling in the silent winter. Xiaoling staggered a few steps after being beaten, her head tilted to one side, her cheeks were burning, and 5 clear fingerprints appeared on her cheeks. She stretched out her hand to wipe the blood from the corner of her lips, then raised her head and looked at the man who beat him. She suddenly understood what he meant when he said the child will be injured. If she was still holding the child in her hands and she was caught off guard by the slap just now, the child would definitely fall to the ground, and life or death would be unpredictable. "Thank you," she said softly. Snapped. Pei Ziyan slapped her again, this time harder, until she flew away. Her thin body hit a flower bed that was as tall as a person, the lush potted plants fell down, and broken branches of plum blossoms and pine trees fell on her. "Madam," when Pei Ziyan slapped Xiaoling for the first time, Zhou's mother was startled, but she held back her scream. This second slap made her even more frightened, and she couldn't help but scream. "Sir, what are you doing?" Joe's mother is an old person in the family. She has been with Pei Zion since he was born not long ago. She has watched him grow up. She can say many things that others dare not persuade. The last two sentences are, Madam has just returned from the hospital after giving birth to a baby, and her body bones are not fully healed yet. How can you hit someone so hard? What if you break it? She was holding the child in her arms and could not help squalling, so she said anxiously to Pei Zion, why don't you go and see if Madam is hurt? Pei Zion stood there, his lips pursed and did not move. He had wanted to slap her for a long time. Ever since he learned that the child was not his biological child, this hateful woman owed him an explanation. More than 10 years ago, he was the one who brought the frightened and helpless girl home from the orphanage. It took so much time and effort to raise them, love each other, and get everything they want. But what happens in the end? Her wings were so hard that she was not clear with another man, and even framed him for being pregnant with another man's child. A few months ago, I was concerned about her health and refrained from beating her. But today, it's time to get the capital back together with interest. Xiaoling was lying on the gravel floor under the corridor. Her arms and back were in pain, and she didn't know if she had any fractures. She fell to the ground and didn't get up for a long time. Faintly, she heard the baby crying in Joe's mother's arms. She raised her head with difficulty and looked at the baby. Mother and child were close to each other. When he cried, she became anxious. She tried again and tried her best to lift herself up from the ground. Unexpectedly, the broken pine branches on her back mixed with large pieces of soil and broken porcelain fell down, hitting her arm and causing her to fall down again. The white palms were stretched awkwardly on the ground, scratched by the broken porcelain pieces on the ground, and blood was flowing all over the ground. The child cried louder. She didn't care about the dirt and blood all over her body. She got up unsteadily and staggered to look at the child. Pei Zion grabbed her arm, dragged her into his arms, and dragged her to the bedroom upstairs. Let me go, I want to see the baby, she screamed. Pei Zion didn't seem to hear her and didn't pay any attention to her. He dragged her directly onto the bed, pressed his tall body on top of her, and bit and kissed her fiercely. You're crazy, she was frightened and angry, her speech was slurred, and she struggled desperately. Pei Zion kissed her for a long time, until their lips and teeth were covered with blood, and then he let go of her with a heavy breath. Do you really think I don't dare to do anything to you? He sneered, his voice full of violence. Xiaoling, you still owe me a son, this time, don't even think about escaping. She was frightened, I just got out of the hospital. How could I give birth to a son for you now? Seeing him reaching out to tear off her clothes, she was so frightened that her voice changed. Don't do this. He ignored her and took off her coat, leaving only her underwear. This is interest. He slowly let go of her and turned to leave. Xiaoling was still in shock. She pulled the quilt on the bed to cover herself, her chest heaving. Madman, he is a madman. For a moment, she thought she would not be able to escape today. Pei Zion wanted to have a son, and she was very hungry. Even if her body was still very weak and not suitable for pregnancy, there was no guarantee that he would not do something drastic. She thought she had made a mistake. Logically speaking, after giving birth to a child, it would take at least a year and a half to raise the child before she could conceive a second child. She thought she still had a year and a half to figure out how to deal with it. But who knew that on her first day back home, he would give her such a big shock? Fortunately, he finally gave up. Why? Xiaoling didn't think that he would have any conscience. She probably knew that the mother needed a recovery period and wanted her to get well as soon as possible so that she could get pregnant again. As he said, what was just mentioned was interest. She was shivering all over and huddled up in bed, looking panicked. Over there, Pei Zion went downstairs. In the living room, the child cried so loudly that Joe's mother couldn't comfort her. Sir, seeing Pei Zion coming down, Joe's mother hurriedly hugged the child and went up to him. The baby can't stop crying. If it continues like this, its throat will be broken. I'm afraid I miss my mother. I'll take it and show it to the madam. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Sci-fi Niang. Chapter 465. Chapter 465 Negotiation. Pei Zion looked at the ugly little guy in her arms and said in a cold voice, missing his mother? He will not have a mother soon. He thought of Xiaoling's thank you when she slapped her just now. What a proud person his Xiaoling was. Even during the year when she was imprisoned in her previous life, she cried, scolded, and bowed her head because of his cruelty. However, she would never beat her because of him. Just say thank you to him. He knew why she said thank you. Thanks to him for not hurting the child, all the hurt is directed at her. It turns out that she would rather suffer so much physical pain than put this ugly little monster in danger. For this reason, she would rather be humble and humble. Pei Zion felt as if a tiny needle had pricked his heart, causing sharp pain. Call the driver and send this scoundrel away, Pei Zion said. Joe's mother was startled. Are you leaving today? Do you want to say hello to madam? Pei Zion looked at her coldly, with a storm brewing in his eyes. Joe's mother was so frightened that she silently hugged the little baby in her arms who was crying out of breath. Pei Zion rang the bell to call the driver. What are you going to do? The driver hadn't arrived yet, but Xiaoling arrived first. Just now, she was in shock on the bed, and then she remembered that her child was still down there. She was worried about leaving her child in such a dangerous environment, so she quickly put on a pair of pajamas and went downstairs. When she reached the stairs, she heard Pei Zion and Joe Ma shouting. Dialogue. She hurriedly came to Joe's mother, took the crying child from her hands, and comforted her softly. The child was very familiar with his mother's breath and heartbeat. Nestled in Xiaoling's arms, he stopped crying soon and showed a pure and flawless smile. Xiaoling looked at the child's smile and felt sad. She raised her head and looked at Pei Zion. Don't send the child away. Pei Zion said, you promised me. She had promised him that she would send the child away when he was born, but when the day came, she was reluctant to let him go. She forced herself to calm down and remembered the idea Feng Kong gave her that day. She looked at Pei Zion and asked, where do you want to send him? Pei Zion didn't hide it from her either, orphanage. I don't want my child to go to an orphanage, she said, taking a few steps back with the child in her arms. As expected, Pei Zion did not arrange a good place for her children. She had grown up in an orphanage and knew how pitiful the children there were. At first, her sister Xiaoyu almost lost her life because she had no money for medical treatment. Now, this baby has a rare blood type. What if she gets injured in the orphanage and cannot receive timely treatment? Is good. Children in the orphanage, if every one of them dies, one of them dies. The dean and teachers sighed for a while, and then it passed. Who can compare with biological parents, who will do their best to rescue? She said cautiously, you, don't send him to an orphanage, okay? I grew up in an orphanage. Don't let my child stay there, she rarely begged him pitifully like this. These words reminded him of some past events. When he saw her in the orphanage, she had pretended to be careful. Even if her foot was pierced by a nail and the pain was bloody, she still had to dance for others as if nothing had happened. His expression softened a little. Where do you want to send him? Xiaoling was even more careful. Send him to Lilei, okay. His somewhat gentle expression just now turned cold again. Why hasn't the driver come yet? He asked Joe's mother. Go and hurry. Joe's mother hurriedly went. Xiaoling was anxious. Pei Zion. Don't be like this. This child has a rare blood type, the same as Lilei. If he is not sent to his biological father, he will easily be in danger. So what, Pei Zion said softly. She choked suddenly. Yeah, so what? What does it have to do with him? Her hands and feet were cold, and she was holding the baby in her arms with great panic. Pei Zion said, Xiaoling, you've given up on this idea. Do you want Li Lei to know that you gave birth to a son for him? I'm telling you, it's a dream. Xiaoling protected the child in her arms, then let me raise him. His blood type is so dangerous. What if something happens to him if he is sent outside? Pei Zion was still very cold. Other children can survive. Even if his life is more difficult, he may not die. Xiaoling, don't make excuses. Xiaoling looked at him sadly. Pei Zion, I don't want my child to leave his parents. I am an orphan. Do you want my son to become an orphan too? Pei Zion felt a slight pain in his heart. Remembering how many years ago, when he had just adopted Xiaoling, she was so frightened. Often, when he woke up in the middle of the night, he would find that she had not slept at all. She was lying quietly on his bedside with her little pajamas and bare feet, lit by a dim nightlight, her eyes unblinking. Looking at him. Why don't you go back to your bedroom to sleep? Pei Zion always put on his clothes and sat up, asking warmly. Xiaoling said, I feel that being adopted by you is like a dream. I am afraid that I will wake up from the dream as soon as I open my eyes. Therefore, I dare not close my eyes and not be able to see you. Silly girl. Pei Zion smiled and kissed her forehead. Later, he asked someone to add a small bed next to his bed and let her sleep in his bedroom. He still remembered that at that time, she would lie on her back on the bed, looking at the ceiling, talking to herself, or to him, Brother Pei, you have to be good. I don't want to become an orphan again. Pei Zion's heart ached even more. I remember that at that time, it took him many years to slowly erase the shadow in her heart. At this moment, Xiaoling looked at him pleadingly and said repeatedly, don't let my child become an orphan. Xiaoling, don't challenge my bottom line. However, Pei Zion still hardened his heart after all. This child is different. She made the mistake first and must be punished. I only promised you not to abort him, so you have to keep your promise and let me send him away. It has nothing to do with you. He couldn't let Li Lei find out that he was the winner. Once the child's life experience is exposed, Li Lei will understand who is completely defeated in this emotional war. Sir, the driver is here. Zhou Ma walked in with the driver. Go and take away the child from Madame's arms, Pei Zion told Zhou's mother. How dare you? Xiaoling's voice changed, her heart pounding, and she said, who dares to touch me? She looked around while protecting the child, and finally her eyes fell on Pei Zion. Pei Zion, if you take this child, if he is sent to another place, I will definitely tell Li Lei the truth. Even if I am unable to protect him in this life, Li Lei will find him and raise him. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weiniang. Chapter 466. Chapter 466 Concession. This was Feng Kun's idea for her, or Pei Zion allowed her to keep the child. Or, send the child to Li Lei, Feng Kun said. Pei Zion is so proud and will never allow Li Lei to know the truth of the matter. As long as you can make up your mind to fight him to the death, then he will be the one to compromise in the end. Xiaoling, he will agree to you keeping the child by your side. Xiaoling's heart was beating wildly, wondering if things would go as Feng Kun expected. She was very nervous and hugged the baby very tightly. The little guy was uncomfortable and started to cry again. Pei Zion's expression became terrifying, and he looked at her as if he wanted to eat someone. Xiaoling suppressed the trembling of her body and bravely met his gaze. I will do what I say. Do you know that you are looking for death? Pei Zion asked word by word. Xiaoling trembled and said, "As long as you don't touch my child, everything is easy to discuss. Pei Ziyan, if you don't allow this child to be raised by my side, then at least let him return to his biological father." Pei Ziyan balances the two aspects. If Xiaoling really doesn't care, it would be very simple to let people know about the child's life experience. If he had to choose, he would rather keep this scoundrel himself than allow his love rival to know the truth. Pei Ziyan took 2 steps forward. Xiaoling retreated until she could no longer retreat. She hugged the child and pressed her back against the wall. Pei Ziyan looked down at the child in her arms. This child seems to be more like Xiaoling, and does not have any Lilei genes that can be recognized at a glance. He pondered for a while. "Xiaoling, this is my last concession to this little scoundrel. You agree that I keep her?" She was ecstatic and carefully confirmed. Pei Ziyan turned around and told Zhou's mother, "Reorganize a baby room as far away from the master bedroom as possible. Don't let me see him." It turned out that the baby room was prepared for his eldest son, and it was in the master bedroom. Next door, he could see it as soon as he got up. But now, this little scoundrel doesn't deserve it. Zhou's mother also realized what Pei Ziyan meant and responded happily. Although she understood that her husband wanted to send away this child that did not belong to her, the child was so pitiful. Now that her husband could accept him, it was a happy ending. Thank you, thank you." Xiaoling looked at Pei Ziyan's back and cried with joy. Pei Ziyan walked away without looking back. Since he decided to keep the child by his side, Pei Ziyan announced the news to the public and announced the birth of the child. Different from the original announcement of Xiaoling's pregnancy, the birth news this time was just a text message, and there was not even a media conference. A reporter asked, "Mr. Pei, this is your eldest son and the future heir of the Pei family. Why is such a happy event such as his birth so low-key?" The person who answered instead of Pei Ziyan was Chu Chen. Chu Chen put on a formulaic smile on his face. "Children are too young and cannot bear too much attention. It is better to be low-key and not let wealth, fame, and wealth weigh on you, so that you can grow up healthily and safely. There has been a saying in China since ancient times that children should not be too pampered, and more importantly, they should be careful not to let wealth overwhelm them." Everyone was Chinese, and when he explained it like this, they all expressed understanding, and even felt somewhat close to the Pei family in their hearts. Look, although people are aloof, their parenting experience is the same as that of ordinary people. Only Pei Ziyan himself understands in his heart, what is fear that the child will not grow up. It's all nonsense, nonsense. The real reason is simply that this child has an unhealthy bloodline and is not worthy of publicity. He was annoyed even by looking at the child. However, under the same roof, you can't see each other when you look up. Having a baby in the family means there is an extra 120,000 hours of excitement. The child alone has too many daily tasks to handle, such as feeding, changing diapers, basking in the sun, teasing and coaxing the child. Xiaoling had no experience in taking care of children, and Zhou's mother couldn't handle even one servant, so Pei Ziyan had no choice but to add 3 more nannies to the house. These 3 nannies all lived in the villa. Every day when Pei Ziyan came home, he felt that the house was so noisy that it made him dizzy. He endured it again and again before he regretted sending the child to Lilei. When I get angry, I will think, is that Lilei such a good father? He must teach that child well so that when the child grows up, he will go against Tianyi. It is best to destroy Tianyi and acquire Tianyi. When the time comes, look at Lilei's crying face. Pei Ziyan's fantasy is very satisfying, but the reality is very cruel. This child is probably weak and is more difficult to take care of than ordinary children. He will cry out of breath at the slightest movement, when it is cold or hot, when there are more or less people around. The whole villa was surrounded by the child, and Mother Zhou was not idle when the 3 new nannies came out. She often helped the three of them and exchanged experiences with each other on how to take care of the little ancestor. That's all. However, even Xiaoling focused most of her attention on the baby and was not as likely to accompany Pei Ziyan to have dinner on time as before. Pei Ziyan caught her several times, but she was absent-minded even when eating. Finally, Pei Ziyan got angry. Xiaoling, don't let me vent my anger on your son. Xiaoling realized that she was afraid, so she ate with him obediently. After eating, he always rushes back to the nursery to take care of the baby. The little baby gradually grows. When he is not crying, he smiles when he sees people. His beautiful and soft little hands and feet make people infinitely fond of him. The servants at home all like him. Joe's mother also liked this child and took good care of him, bathing him, turning him over, and entertaining him with many toys in her spare time. But Xiaoling was always vigilant and would not allow her to have any contact with her child alone. No matter if she was neurotic or overly guarded, the abortion pill incident made Xiaoling worried about her and she didn't want anything to happen to her child again. The sleep cycle of young babies is very short, and they often wake up in just 1 or 2 hours, crying with their mouths flat. In the middle of the night, Xiaoling always wakes up from her dreams without warning, then gets up and gets out of bed, puts on her thin pajamas and goes to the baby's room. In the small room, sure enough, the child is crying again. She fed him milk, changed his diapers, and put him to sleep. It often takes many times in one night. Lack of sleep directly caused her poor complexion, making her look pale and haggard. Pei Ziyan was very dissatisfied. If the child cries, someone will take care of it. Why are you so anxious? Xiaoling didn't dare to make him unhappy, but she still retorted in a low voice, it's different from taking care of him personally. Pei Ziyan squinted his eyes and looked at her. Sleep well. When you give birth to my son, you will have plenty of opportunities to take care of it by yourself. If you are impatient to go to bed to take care of yourself, we will give birth now. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 467. Chapter 467 Fragile Peace. Xiaoling was so frightened that she did not dare to disobey him again. She no longer got up at night to take care of the children, but she still woke up inexplicably late at night and tossed and turned. Pei Ziyan was also woken up and asked her, "What's wrong?" She said softly, "I seem to hear the child crying." Pei Ziyan snorted coldly. So Xiaoling didn't dare to move and forced herself to continue sleeping. However, she always kept her eyes open until dawn, and her face looked even more haggard than before. Pei Ziyan had no choice but to allow her to get up at night to take care of the child. After all, he wanted her to take good care of herself and take good care of herself as soon as possible. The doctor said that if she didn't take a good rest, she might never be able to get pregnant again, and Pei Ziyan would never allow that to happen. Now, Xiaoling spends 24 hours a day with her child at home. When the baby laughs, she laughs too, and when the baby cries, she becomes anxious. The nannies all said that it was really rare. Among wealthy young ladies, there were very few people who took care of their children as carefully as she did. She could do what she did herself without relying on others. This baby is so happy. Only Xiaoling knows, how is this happiness? The new nannies have this misconception because they don't know the child's life experience. Whenever she heard the nannies complimenting her, saying that her husband and wife were harmonious and their children were cute, her face would show a slight bitterness. Several nannies misunderstood. "Madam, don't blame Mr. Mr. is usually so busy with work, it is normal for him to have no time to accompany the young master. When the young master grows older and is not so noisy, he will be able to call daddy. Now that I can run and dance, maybe my husband will like to get close to him." Except for Joe's mother, the other servants all call the baby young master. They also found that Pei Zion was a little cold towards the baby, but thought that this was just because the man didn't care about these trivial matters of child care. Xiaoling couldn't express her pain, so she could only thank them for their comfort. These days are not easy for her. Babies are very troublesome. They have weak bones and cry easily. They will feel uncomfortable if they are slightly cold or hot, or if they eat too much or too little. One day, Joe's mother shook her head and sighed, "Why is it so difficult to take care of this child?" Xiaoling happened to hear it and glanced at her coldly. Ma Joe, shut up quickly. Nowadays, her relationship with her wife is very delicate. She does not trust her very much, and she is not allowed to handle anything related to the children. Joe's mother felt aggrieved and felt sorry for Madame. Such a young woman had no experience in raising children. She had to learn all by herself and struggled to take care of her children. Also take care of your husband's emotions. Since having this little baby, Pei Zion has been in a bad mood and ordered Joe's mother not to let the child appear in front of her. These days, I haven't even seen a child. Joe's mother understood him very well, out of sight and out of sight. It's just a pain for Xiaoling, so you have to take care of both ends, and worry about one and lose the other. On this day, Xiaoling had dinner with Pei Zion again. The baby in the nursery started crying for some reason, crying so loudly that no one could coax him. The nanny who was taking care of the child was very anxious. She hurried downstairs and came to the dining room and said, "Madam, it's not good. The young master is crying so hard that his voice is going hoarse. In the restaurant, the candlelight is just right." Pei Zion and Xiaoling sat face to face and were having a Western-style dinner. Actually, Xiaoling had already heard the child's faint cry, but it hindered Pei Zion and did not dare to show the slightest worry. Hearing what the nanny said, she instinctively made a move to get up. Unexpectedly, just as she moved, Pei Zion put down his chopsticks heavily. Xiaoling didn't dare to leave and glanced at him, her eyes full of pleading. "You can't really let your child cry like this. What should you do if your voice breaks down from crying?" Beside, Zhou Ma, who was serving the two of them, also understood what happened. She also loved this baby very much. At this time, her heart was in doubt and she tentatively said, "Sir, Madam, would you like me to go and take a look?" Xiaoling glanced at Pei Zion's face and saw that he looked unmoved. Although she was worried about Zhou's mother, Xiaoling knew very well that she would not be able to leave the table until she had finished dinner with Pei Zion, so she had no choice but to say to Zhou's mother, "Thank you for your trouble." It was rare for her to be so polite to Zhou Ma. Ma Zhou was flattered, decided to behave well, and hurried to the nursery. The baby was still crying, his little body was twitching from crying, his voice was hoarse, and his little face was red. Zhou's mother quickly picked up the baby and asked the nanny while coaxing her, "Have you fed the baby?" The nanny said, "I was fed just now, so I'm not hungry." Zhou's mother checked the child's swaddling clothes. It was very dry and there was no bedwetting. She walked back and forth with the child in her arms, coaxing her softly. The child's crying became quieter, but in an instant it started sobbing loudly again. The nanny said, "Looking at the young master like this, he probably misses his mother." Zhou's mother was very worried and said, "Madam is having dinner with her husband. No matter what, she has to finish her meal before she can come to comfort the young master." The nanny was a little anxious. What should I do? She was new here and didn't dare to disturb Pei Zion. She had to urge Zhou's mother, "Please think of a solution quickly." Ma Zhou looked at the crying baby, gritted her teeth, and returned to the restaurant with a heart. She said respectfully to Pei Zion and Xiaoling, "The baby can't stop crying no matter what. I've tried all the methods. I guess he misses his mother. If he wants her to hug him, he might stop crying." Xiaoling became even more restless and looked at Pei Zion eagerly, "Can I go and coax him?" Because she was worried, She ate very quickly and had already finished her meal. However, he did not dare to get up and leave the table immediately because Pei Ziyan was still chewing carefully. Pei Ziyan glanced at her pitiful appearance and suddenly felt jealous of that child. Xiaoling cared so much about him. It would be great if he could pay more attention to himself. The crying in the baby room can be heard clearly in the restaurant. Pei Ziyan became irritable again, but he was unwilling to let Xiaoling leave. He frowned and said, "Compromise, bring the child to Madam." Zhou's mother was full of surprise. "Sir." Pei Ziyan didn't hate this child very much, why would he let someone bring the child over? Even Xiaoling looked at Pei Ziyan in surprise. Pei Ziyan was a little impatient. "Go if I tell you to." Ma Zhou came to her senses and quickly carried the child to Xiaoling. The child was still crying. Xiaoling reached out and carefully took it, holding it in her arms and coaxing it again and again. Oddly enough, the baby quickly calmed down in his mother's arms, his crying gradually became quieter, and he snuggled up to his mother and fell asleep unknowingly. A faint gentle smile appeared on Xiaoling's face. She had never shown such a smile to Pei Ziyan. Okay, today's 20 updates have been updated. Please look forward to tomorrow's 22 updates. One chapter will be updated at 0 o'clock tomorrow night starting at 8 o'clock in the morning. One chapter will be updated every hour. The remaining chapters will be randomly added. Send messages from time to time. Mamada. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weiniang. Chapter 468. Chapter 468, Dirty Bloodline. Pei Ziyan looked at her in a daze. He had never seen her coaxing a child, so he didn't know that she could be so gentle. He was very jealous of the little baby in her arms, enjoying maternal love unscrupulously. This jealousy was like 10,000 ants gnawing at his heart, chewing away holes in it. He didn't even finish his dinner, put down the tableware and went straight to the study. Xiaoling noticed that he was unhappy and flinched a little, and her own mood also dropped. She coaxed the child for a long time and carefully carried the child back to the nursery, so as not to bump into Pei Ziyan outside later and disturb his eyes. The way he looked at the child just now frightened her. In the study, Pei Ziyan couldn't calm down, thinking about handling things, but his mind was filled with the scene of Xiaoling coaxing the baby softly and slowly. Her every smile and every subtle expression touched his heart. Why, that child is not your own. How perfect it would be if it were his. However, if it was really his child, would Xiaoling still be so attentive? Will she still show such a gentle expression and take good care of her children? The more he thought about it, the more anxious he became. He crumpled up the documents in his hand and threw them towards the corner. He stayed in the study for a long time. When he returned to the bedroom, he found that the luxurious double bed was empty. The fine silk bedding was neatly spread. It was deserted and not touched at all. He called Zhou's mother. "Where is Madam?" Zhou's mother said, "Madam is still in the nursery, should I go and call her?" Pei Ziyan waved his hand and walked towards the baby's room. He was a little unusual today. Normally, he never set foot in that remote north-facing room. Yes, he placed the little baby's room in a dark corner facing north without sunlight. When he spoke, he saw Xiaoling's aggrieved eyes, but she was not qualified to fight against him. At that time, looking at her injured appearance, Pei Ziyan felt very happy. But now, when she would rather stay in that small, dark room with a child who was less than 3 months old, but left him alone in the luxurious bedroom, he felt very depressed. It was as empty as a bedroom and had an indescribable feeling. He walked to the door of the nursery, and a faint warm yellow light came from inside the door. Pei Ziyan looked in and saw the little baby lying peacefully in the cradle bed. On the carpet beside the cradle bed, Xiaoling was wearing loose home clothes. She held the cradle bed with one hand and leaned her head on it, closing her eyes. Eyes asleep. Under the light, Her shoulders were thin and her waist was as slender as that of an unmarried girl. Her crow-blue hair fell messily, revealing a small section of her fair and shiny neck. She is truly as beautiful as jade. Pei Xian looked at her with soft eyes and even his breathing became lighter. No matter how much resentment you have, you can't express it against her peaceful sleeping face. It was probably a little cool on the carpet. She curled up slightly and hugged herself with her arms. Pei Xian looked around and found a soft blanket from the other side of the crib, with a faint milky scent, and draped it over her body. When Lita entered, he smelled a faint milky fragrance on her body, mixed with the sweet fragrance unique to girls, a unique and charming scent. He couldn't help but kiss her gently on the cheek. When she was awake, she didn't like his kiss, but when she fell asleep, she didn't reject it. Her eyebrows were closed peacefully, and her breathing was shallow and long. Pei Xian couldn't help but think of the 4 words, "The years are quiet and good." He took her into his arms, put his forehead against hers, and whispered, "Xiaoling, how about we have a baby too?" He wanted a child with her so much that he went crazy thinking about it. If she has a child, will she stay with him wholeheartedly, or even fall in love with her again? There was a noise in the cradle bed. Pei Xian turned around and saw that the baby had woken up at some point and was looking at him curiously with a pair of watery eyes. The gentle look on Pei Xian's face faded little by little, and he became indifferent again. He doesn't like the child, not at all. The little baby was unaware and still stared at him curiously. It was probably rare to see this person. The baby's eyes were full of freshness, and even his short hands couldn't help but wave. Pei Xian stood up, walked to the cradle bed, and looked down at him. Still has an indifferent expression. The baby probably inherited the nature of its biological father and knew nothing about the dangerous environment. When he saw Pei Xian approaching, a bright smile suddenly appeared on his face. Pei Xian was stunned. Except for Xiaoling, this was the first person to show him such a pure and unguarded smile, without any impurities, as clean and clear as the bright sun. Looking at those bright eyes, he couldn't look away. Looking carefully, this child looks really similar to Xiaoling, especially the eyes, mouth, and nose, which are delicate, without any unnecessary lines. When he looked carefully, the traces of Lilei were very faint, so faint that Pei Xian could hardly find anything in common. Pei Xian's heart softened little by little, and his expression became gentle. The little guy in the cradle seemed to sense his kindness, and started to smile again. He stretched out his short hand to catch him, or maybe he wanted him to hug him. If Li Feng were here, he would definitely feel that this little baby is in the same line as his biological father. Even if he doesn't look very similar in appearance, his character is exactly the same. When faced with danger, he instinctively knows how to act cute or act stupid to the enemy. Strive for a chance to survive. This is simply a survival strategy. If Li Feng were here, he would definitely warn Pei Xian not to be deceived by the pretended innocence of the baby. When this little grows up, he will definitely become a bad guy like Li Lei. It's a pity that Li Feng is not here. Pei Xian, who had no experience in dealing with babies, was easily fascinated by this cute little guy. In a strange way, he slowly reached out his hand and touched him carefully. Very soft to the touch. The little guy's body is warmer than expected, and his skin is as smooth as silk. Pei Xian was startled by this fresh feeling and instinctively retracted his hand. After a while, he couldn't help but tentatively touch it again. It turns out that this is what a baby feels like. He looked at him for a long time, his expression a little complicated. The little guy giggled, thinking that this powerful and tall man was playing with him, waving his short hands and short legs, and babbling, with a voice that sounded as good as singing. As expected of Xiaoling's child. Pei Xian thought that when he grows up, he will probably be a good singer, right? However, it is a pity that the other half of the blood in the body is dirty after all. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Sci-fi. Chapter 469. Chapter 469 Mother's Family. The baby was still fussing, but Peizian stopped paying attention to him, turned around, and walked out of the baby room step by step. In the baby's room, the light is still warm. Xiaoling, who was kneeling on the side of the cradle bed, suddenly opened her eyes, glanced at his retreating back nervously, then got up to look after the baby in the bed. Great, the baby is safe and sound. Xiaoling took out the little guy who was holding up her short hands and coaxed her softly, but she was a little confused in her heart. Why did Peizian suddenly think of visiting the child? How strange. Actually, Xiaoling woke up early. She was startled when he covered her with a blanket and leaned over to kiss her. She opened her eyes slightly and saw Peizian close at hand. She was so frightened that she quickly closed her eyes again. When he opened his eyes secretly again, he saw Peizian standing beside the cradle bed, looking at the baby quietly, with deep eyes, not knowing what he was thinking. Xiaoling's heartbeat accelerated, fearing that he would do something harmful to the child. Fortunately, he just stretched out his hand and touched the baby lightly, then turned and left. Thank God. Xiaoling held the baby close to her heart, her body trembling slightly. The baby stared at his mother curiously with watery eyes. He seemed a little confused and didn't understand why his mother was so nervous. Knowing that he was sleepy and wanted to sleep, he closed his eyes again and fell asleep peacefully in his mother's arms. Xiaoling put him back on the cradle and turned off the light. Go back to the bedroom. Peizian had already changed into a navy blue silk satin nightgown and got into the luxurious bed. He seemed to have fallen asleep. The moonlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows and softly shone on his handsome face. He looked like a demon, the kind of beauty that could make countless little girls scream crazily. It's a pity that Xiaoling has already passed that age. She also changed into her pajamas and went to bed quietly, trying not to disturb him. Lying down on the other side of the bed, she slept with her back to him as usual. Not long after, she felt a hot body coming up behind her and hugging her. Her body stiffened and she wanted to struggle, but she held back. These days, Peizian often falls asleep holding her in his arms like this. He has a strong possessive desire, and it is the greatest degree of restraint to only touch her to this extent after she has been back for nearly a year. But today, something seems to be different. Xiaoling felt a slight movement on the back of her neck, and something soft touched her. It was his lips. His breath brushed against her ears. Give me a child. Xiaoling's heart was in her throat. He had said the same thing just now in the nursery when he thought she was still asleep. Is he really impatient? Xiaoling said carefully, I'm not feeling well yet. Peizian said, I asked the doctor, half a year is enough. In fact, the doctor said 1 year. 1 year is a safe time, but half a year is still a bit hasty, and it is not good for mother and baby. But he couldn't wait any longer. Xiaoling said, it's only been less than 3 months. The man behind her hugged her tighter and made no sound. Xiaoling felt uneasy. If the doctor really said that she can get pregnant again in 6 months, then there would only be more than 3 months left. After more than 3 months, will she be forced to become Peizian's real wife? Pregnant with his true blood? That's terrible. Xiaoling kept her eyes open, thinking about how to delay the attack, and stayed awake all night. Pretending to be worried, Xiaoling's appetite was not very good the next day, resulting in less milk, and the baby, who was already picky about food, started crying again. This little baby is very particular about what he eats. He probably inherited the genes from both parents. He has a very picky mouth and won't take any milk powder. He insists on feeding Xiaoling herself. Xiaoling had no choice but to ask Zhou's mother to make crucian carp soup to replenish her body. In the following days, she drank every day until she felt like vomiting. But in order to keep up with the baby's nutrition, she could only grit her teeth and persevere. The servants devoted themselves to replenishing her health. On the one hand, the baby needed to drink breast milk, and on the other hand, Pei Xian had ordered that the wife must be kept healthy. Let her body withstand the second pregnancy as quickly as possible. Her complexion is getting rosier day by day, and her body and bones are getting better. On this day, she was basking in the sun in the garden with her baby in her arms. Zhou's mother came to see her, but she couldn't speak. Xiaoling asked, "Mother Zhou, what's the matter?" Zhou's mother hesitated for a moment and then said, "Madam, when I went out to buy groceries today, I met a woman who claimed to be your natal family member, named Lu Zayadai." Lu Zayadai, Aunt Lu? If Zhou's mother hadn't mentioned it, Xiaoling would have almost forgotten this person. Isn't this the stepmother of the original owner of Yexin Ling's body in her life? He betrayed and framed her several times. What is she looking for you for? Xiaoling frowned slightly, feeling that something was up to her. Sure enough, Zhou's mother said, she said that even though you have married into the Pei family, you should often go around with your natal family. It has been a long time since you have been in contact. Since you announced the news of your pregnancy a few months ago, they have been trying to contact you, but they have been unable to contact you. They are very anxious and worried about you, saying that you are a little girl. How can you? Zhou's mother swallowed back the following words. What did you say about me? Xiaoling didn't care. She had known that Aunt Lu wouldn't have anything nice to say. Speaking of you, saying you, pregnant before marriage. Zhou's mother was very upset. It would be fine if outsiders said this to my wife, but as a family member, how could she say the same? Although Lu Zayadai claims to be Madam's mother, how can she look like a mother at all? It's obvious at first glance that they're not hers, so they're acting like this. Xiaoling didn't take it seriously and smiled lightly. It's just a fact she couldn't escape this reputation. Even if Pei Xian hadn't taken her away at that time, Li Lei probably wouldn't be able to give her a reputation right away. She asked calmly, what else did you say? Zhou's mother admired her wife's good manners and replied, she also said that she and your father went to the emperor to find you, but were stopped by the security guard at the door and were not allowed to enter. The security guard asked Mr. Chu Chen to come out, and Mr. Chu Chen took they drove them away and threatened not to contact you again. I see. Xiaoling then understood why Aunt Lu had known about her pregnancy for a long time, but didn't come to her until now. It turned out that he was stopped by Chu Chen. Chu Chen must have received Pei Xian's instructions a long time ago. Why doesn't Pei Xian let her meet her family in this life? Xiaoling thought about it for a while and then she understood. That's because Pei Xian knew very well that she was reincarnated and had nothing to do with the so-called father and mother in this life, so she was not a real family. In his opinion, these poor relatives just wanted to take advantage of her and take advantage of her. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 470. Chapter 470 Self-Injury. He probably drove them away because he was afraid of affecting her mood during pregnancy. He must have investigated who those parents were and understood that Xiaoling didn't like them. Xiaoling was thinking as she lowered her head and gently coaxed the baby in her arms. The baby had just drank milk, and now he was squinting his eyes and basking in the sun in his mother's arms, feeling extremely comfortable and comfortable. His face looked like he was sleeping, and bubbles were happily popping out of his mouth. This child has been vomiting some milk recently. Xiaoling took a cotton handkerchief to wipe it with him while thinking about it. I wonder if Li Lei did the same when he was a child. A sweet smile appeared on her face when she thought that Lilei might have been so cute when he was a baby. You are a clown, a picky eater, and a crybaby. Forget it, why are you still so young? Mom will forgive you first. You need to be more handsome when you grow up, you know. The little guy giggled. Joe's mother was waiting nearby, muttering in her heart that her wife had obviously not seen her parents' family for a long time. Why was she not excited at all and even a little indifferent when she heard that her parents' family had come to visit her? She really can't understand. Xiaoling coaxed the baby for a while. Seeing that Joe's mother was still standing, she asked, "Is there anything else?" Joe's mother hesitated for a moment, then said, "Madam, they are your relatives no matter what, why don't you meet them?" Relatives? It's nothing more than wanting money. A sneer curled up at the corner of Xiaoling's lips, and she wanted to take off some bracelets, earrings, or something like that from her body to send them away. Unfortunately, she fumbled for a long time before she remembered that because she had to take care of a baby recently, she was afraid of those gold jade. Jade will tickle him, so he no longer wears any jewelry. She secretly made a note of Aunt Liu's matter in her mind, took the time to contact her assistant, and asked the assistant to come forward and pay a living expense to the Ye family's account on time every month. Actually, she has been sending money home since she debuted from the Tianyi training camp a long time ago. It wasn't until the paragliding accident that she was taken away by Pei Zion. The period was too chaotic, and Pei Zion closed all channels for her external communication, that she forgot about it. Although the Ye family's parents are really hateful. But since she has taken over Ye Xingling's body and promised in her heart that she will help her fulfill her filial piety, she must fulfill it well. However, since those parents are so weird, she will only fulfill her obligation to support a child, so don't expect to get much profit from her. A few days later, Aunt Lu received a call from Xiaoling's assistant, 5,000 yuan. The assistant also sent a message to Aunt Lu, "From now on, Madam will give you money every month, and please don't disturb her life anymore." Yes, father is very happy when he has money and doesn't want to disturb his daughter at all. In his opinion, his daughter is just going to enjoy happiness when she marries a rich family, so what else is there to worry about? Aunt Lu, on the other hand, was very unhappy with the 5,000 yuan and complained to Father Ye, "It's only 5,000 yuan? That's not how you pay a beggar. Old Ye, your daughter is now prosperous and has become a big star. She married into a wealthy family, so why is she so fussy about giving her some money? Does she take you as a father seriously? It's so shameless and unfilial." Let's just say, Father Ye said, 5,000 yuan is already worth my combined income for 2 months this time. He knew in his heart that Xiaoling was his own flesh and blood. For his own sake, I didn't care about them. Otherwise, just because they betrayed her like that before, she would be thankful not to take them to court, let alone pay them. And after Fei becomes a vegetative state, Xiaoling is trying to find a way to bear all the hospitalization expenses. Father Ye rarely said a fair word. "What do you mean Ye Xingling is taking the responsibility?" Aunt Lu jumped up. "The person who paid for Fei's medical expenses is obviously the Emperor's Mr. Pei. It was Mr. Pei who thanked us for helping him connect the dots between him and that stinky girl." Aunt Lu gasped, "Without our help, would that stinky girl be able to marry Mr. Pei? Can she live a life of a rich wife? Why, now that she's flying up a branch, she's going to cross the river and tear down the bridge and turn her face away. Are you here? Let me tell you, Lao Ye, nothing is so cheap in the world." Aunt Lu was furious. "I must make her cough up more money this time." Father Ye was silenced by what she said. Why did it sound reasonable? Xiaoling is really not very sensible. She was brought into a wealthy family by her parents through all the hard work, and she doesn't know how to get more money from her parents' family so that they can enjoy the happiness as parents. But Father Ye still had some sense after all. "Don't mess around, Zayadai, have you forgotten what President Chu warned us when we went to the emperor last time? Chuchen had given them a serious warning, or in other words, intimidation and threats, telling them not to go to Xiaoling or talk nonsense in the media, otherwise, they would bear the consequences. His threat was very effective, because the other daughter of the Ye family, Ye Xingfei, who is in a vegetative state, is still lying in the hospital. All hospitalization expenses, nursing expenses, and nutritional expenses are all paid by the emperor. If they offend the emperor, they will have no good consequences. Eat. Aunt Lu was a little timid when she remembered the warning. After thinking about it, she said to Father Ye, "We don't talk nonsense to the media. We can come to see Ye Xingling's newly born son, right? How could he have given birth to a child? It's been so long and you haven't been allowed to see your mother's family." Yes, father thought about it and agreed, so he nodded in agreement. Aunt Lu was very happy to be able to come to visit Kai Yifeng, and her mind became active. Afraid of being turned away by Ye Xingling, she said to Yes father, "Hey, call that old woman of yours. Isn't that stinky girl very close to her? If you bring the old woman with you, she won't be able to kiss you." Grandma also refused. Father Ye said weakly, "That's my mother, not an old woman." Aunt Lu raised her eyebrows and glared at him. "What is she if she's not a dead old woman? She's originally from the country, she doesn't have a few cents of inheritance, and she still picks her nose and eyes at my daughter-in-law. Doesn't she want to see us? It's really old fool. You're still protecting her." Yes, father lowered his head and did not dare to speak. He himself has no ability and cannot make much money, so he deserves to be scorned by his wife at home. His wife scolded him for being worthless all the time, saying that she had been unlucky for 8 lifetimes before marrying him. One moment she disliked the clothes he wore for being too cheap, the other moment she disliked the house he lived in was too small, and the other moment she disliked the food he ate was too poor. Fortunately, now that Xiaoling has married into a good family, she can provide more for the family. When Aunt Lu lives in a big house, wears good clothes, and eats good food, she may treat her husband with more respect. Chapters are out of order. In order to avoid repeated payment, I have moved the following chapters up 1 chapter. If they match the chapter names, they will not affect the reading order. End of this chapter.